This is IRS Form 8300. This is a form that is filed with the IRS FinCEN to report cash payments received of $10,000 or more. Technically, anyone in business that takes in more than $10,000 in cash from any one person, even if it's over the course of, let's say, a week, you have to file this form with the IRS to identify who it is that gave you the cash. Now, the reason why I'm doing this video is because I get a lot of questions over the years about, how much can I deposit in the bank before it's a problem? Well, my answer has always been $10,000, but it depends. It depends on the reporting of the bank. Personally, I have never seen anyone audited or brought to task for not filing this form, even though we know for sure there are many businesses that take in more than $10,000 in cash. Typically, it's something that only banks have to deal with. I've talked about this in previous videos where there's a lot of quote unquote tax code and tax rules that don't get enforced. And when they're not enforced, the idea of following those rules is kind of ridiculous. Okay. There's also another thing that the IRS says, which is there cannot be any tax rule or code that is what's the word I'm looking for? That can inhibit business. Meaning that if it takes too much time, if it takes too much money for you to adhere to this rule, then you don't have to follow it. Now, if you are audited, if you are brought to task over this thing, you do have to prove that in fact it was just too much for you to handle, and that's the reason why you didn't adhere to the rule. And if a reasonable person finds that to be true, then you're good, right? And so that's what this comes down to. It's not enforced. Another rule that's not enforced a lot are 1099 workers. When you have someone that works for you and you pay them cash or a check or whatever, technically by the rule, you're supposed to be filing 1099s for these persons, but it does not happen. And I have not seen in any case where that has been a problem until you are audited, right? And you're trying to say that you paid over, let's say $100,000 out in wages. And then the question becomes, all right, well, where are the 1099s, right? In that case, it can be a problem. But just as far as, just filing a tax return, I've never seen it questioned, unfortunately. Personally, I like the idea of 1099 workers, but, neither here nor there. So I just wanted to show you, this is the form. I'm going to put the instructions and everything in the description. The reason why this came up, though, is because for the first time in a long time, we're able to see kind of behind the veil of what's going on with reporting at some of these banks. So TD, Toronto-Dominion Bank, is a Canadian bank. I've been following them for a long time. Really love the bank. They always pay a really good dividend. And they have just recently been found guilty of basically not reporting these cash transactions. And I wanted to point out a specific article here. This is from the government website about this particular case. And this is what it says. It says, so persons were depositing over $10,000 in cash into a Toronto-Dominion bank, which is typically in Canada, but they do have some U.S. Locations as well. TD Bank employees did not identify the people who were depositing this cash, meaning that they didn't file this Form 8300. And yeah, they moved $120 million through these banks, and then they were withdrawing the money in Colombia. So think about that. So you're depositing $120 million over the course of some years, right? And immediately the money is then being withdrawn in Colombia. Now, understand that banking regulation and regulation in general is very slow to keep up with what's actually happening. And that goes for the tax code as well, right? It's very slow to keep up with what's actually happening. So many times I go through bank statements and I see people have Zelle payments coming in, Zelle payments coming out. There's Cash App, there's Venmo, there's all these different payment applications. And the question becomes, okay, what is that? Is that business transactions? Are those gifts? Are those loans? Like, who knows, right? And then the other problem is let's say I'm paying my employee or I'm paying a contractor through Cash App, but he asked me to send the money to his girlfriend's account. Okay, so now on my bank statement, I have money going out to some person that I'm not even affiliated with. So it's really weird, and like I said, regulation has yet to catch up with what's going on, and so I always recommend not doing those things if you don't have to. But at the end of the day, all you can do is do the best you can, and as we can see here in this case, that's what banks are doing too. Now, understand that banks are taking in millions and millions of cash every single day, and people are definitely depositing well over $10,000, and the banks are not reporting this. Now, TD Bank is the one that got caught, but I am certain that if TD Bank is guilty of this in the billions of dollars, then it's happening at all the other major banks as well. Does that mean that we're going to see more regulation? Does that mean that we're going to see more banks kind of stepping up their efforts to report these transactions? I don't know. I have a feeling that nothing is going to change as usual. So far, there hasn't been any bills or anything like that that's been coming up. There hasn't been any talk in any of the political campaigns that's going on right now. So I don't think anything is going to change. No one seems to care much about finance regulation these days. But I just thought this was really interesting. And then take a look at the share price. This was just last week. And as you can see, it was at like 63, 64, and now it's dropped all the way down to 57. The dividend is somewhere around 5.5%. If this thing gets down to like 53, 54, it is an absolute buy, like for sure, because by that time, I think the dividend is going to be close to 6%, if not 6%. I'm curious now. No, still 5.5. So anyway, still though, I think it's a decent investment. It's not going to stay down for long. Again, it's a really good bank, and everyone has to at some point be made an example out of, and so this is one of those times. But this is a really interesting article. I'll link this one in the description as well. That really kind of talks about the case and what they were found guilty of, and it just kind of goes to show you kind of what the banks are up against, right? I mean, what are they supposed to do? You're telling me that I just did this literally just last week. So I was paying someone who was working for me who was in Kenya, okay? And I wanted to pay the young lady through a payment app that is popular in Kenya. And she said, no, 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 send the money to my sister who's here in the United States. So I send the money from my bank to her sister who's here in the United States, who's then going to send the money to Kenya. I mean, how is any of this stuff being tracked? I mean, it's almost impossible. I do think the blockchain is a very interesting idea that I think is being utilized and will probably be the default here in the next 10, 20 years, if not sooner. But it's tough. It's tough, and asking the banks to keep up with all this stuff is near impossible. Again, these guys are literally guilty of someone depositing cash and then the money being taken out immediately from an ATM in Colombia, which when you see it written down like that, you're like, well, clearly this is something wrong is going on here. But in reality, on a day-to-day basis, this kind of stuff happens all the time. So how do you even try to monitor that? Anyway, from me to you, I holla.